The first time I noticed my stepfather watching me, he wasn't really looking at me. His eyes had gone past skin and shadow, as if he'd found a secret window inside me and was standing on the other side, silent, patient, waiting. There was no menace in his stare, only recognition, a strange and painful kind of knowing. It was the sort of look that makes your heart pull back from your ribs, because something ancient inside you understands that being seen too deeply can be just as dangerous as being invisible. I remember the way the air thickened around us, how the sound of the refrigerator became a low, trembling hum, and how I suddenly felt the shape of my own fear. Thin, trembling but alive. When I tried to look away, I couldn't. His gaze held me there, pinned not by cruelty but by sorrow. It was as if he wanted to say something he couldn't bring himself to admit, a confession sitting behind his lips like a wounded animal afraid to crawl into daylight. That night I realized that there are moments in life when silence becomes the loudest sound in the room. And in that silence, I began to understand that the people closest to us can become our greatest mysteries, ghosts still breathing, carrying secrets that hum beneath every ordinary word they speak. If you've ever felt that haunting familiarity, like someone knows you more than you want them to, you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. This isn't just a story about a stepfather or a broken family. It's about the quiet invasions that live in our memories, the kind that never leave even when the people do. Before we go deeper, if stories like this hold something for you, truth, darkness, beauty, or maybe just a mirror for the strange ache we all carry, take a moment to breathe, to stay with me. If you find something here that resonates, let it reach others too. Like, share, subscribe. Not as a favor, but as a way of keeping this kind of truth alive in the noise. Because what's coming next isn't easy to hear, but it deserves to be remembered. Now, this story unfolds in 5 parts, each one peeling back another layer of what happened in that house, and what it means to be truly seen by someone who should have loved you, but instead chose silence. The house was older than it looked. It carried its age in the way it settled at night, creaking and sighing like an old animal curling into sleep. When my mother first brought me there, she said it felt peaceful. But peace isn't always gentle. It can be heavy too, like the hush before a confession. The first night I slept there, I remember the air felt too still, the kind of stillness that presses against your chest until you start counting your own breaths just to be sure you're still there. The windows were tall, but the curtains never moved, not even when the wind rattled the trees outside. It was as if the house had learned long ago not to flinch. My stepfather's voice carried easily through those rooms. It was a low, deliberate kind of voice, the sort that could sound kind without actually being warm. He was a man of routines. Morning coffee at 6:30, the newspaper folded just once, shoes lined precisely by the door. My mother called it discipline. I called it choreography. Every motion had meaning, every sound a place in his quiet orchestra. When I tried to join in, to belong to that rhythm, I always found myself half a beat too late. He noticed that. He noticed everything. He wasn't cruel, not in the way people mean when they use that word. His cruelty lived in subtler places, in pauses, in glances, in the way he could turn a simple silence into a verdict. I could feel it most in the kitchen, where the refrigerator's hum filled the space between us. He'd sit there, elbows on the table, eyes lowered but somehow still watching me. Sometimes he'd ask simple questions about school, or whether I liked the food my mother made. But beneath each question was something unspoken, as if he were measuring the distance between my words and what he thought I was hiding. It started small, that feeling of being seen from the inside out. I'd be sitting in the living room reading, and I'd look up to find him standing in the doorway, not saying a word. Just standing there. He'd nod slightly when our eyes met, like acknowledging something he couldn't say aloud. Then he'd turn away, his footsteps vanishing into another part of the house. But even after he left, I could feel him lingering in the air, as if the room itself had taken his shape. The walls carried whispers at night. I could hear them when I lay awake, the soft murmuring of the house settling, or maybe remembering. The hallway light always flickered once around midnight, a single pulse like the heartbeat of something buried. My mother slept deeply beside him, her breathing steady and unaware. Sometimes I envied her for that. Other times I wondered if she heard the same sounds I did and just chose not to listen. There was one moment, one I can't forget, when I saw the house breathe. I had woken up thirsty and gone to the kitchen for water. The air felt thick, as if I'd walked into someone else's dream. The shadows along the walls moved faintly, pulsing in and out, like lungs drawing shallow breaths. I stood there, frozen, glass in hand, and felt the floor shift beneath me. It wasn't the kind of movement you could see, only feel, a subtle flex like the boards were alive beneath my feet. I told myself it was imagination, the residue of sleep. But then I heard it, the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing that didn't belong to me. When I turned, he was there, my stepfather, standing in the doorway again. He wasn't angry, just watching. His expression was calm, almost sorrowful. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked quietly. His voice didn't sound real in that moment, more like a sound the house made to test whether I was listening. I nodded, unable to speak. He stepped closer, took the glass from my hand, filled it again, and set it down in front of me. Then he smiled, small, measured, and said, "You'll get used to it. The house takes time." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. Not this house, but the house, as if it had a will of its own, as if I was the one being tested. He turned away after that, disappearing down the hall without another word. But that night I didn't drink the water. I sat there until dawn, listening to the slow, patient breathing that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Days passed, but the feeling didn't. I began to notice how certain rooms seemed to react to him. When he entered the living room, the air felt heavier. When he left, it seemed to exhale. Even sunlight behaved differently around him, thinning out, losing warmth. I used to think houses couldn't choose sides, but maybe they can. Maybe they remember who keeps secrets inside them. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I understood what he meant, that the house takes time. It didn't belong to us. We belonged to it, each of us playing our part in whatever story it was still trying to finish. I began to move more quietly, speak less, breathe shallower, as if to blend in, to not disturb the rhythm already carved into the floorboards. But every time I passed him in the hallway, every time his eyes brushed mine, I felt the same thing, that he saw something in me the house recognized, something it had been waiting for, and as the days stretched on, the silence between us deepened, not empty, but full. Full of something unnamed and growing, a tension that hummed through every wall, every shadow, every stolen glance. The house was breathing, and I was beginning to understand that so was the fear inside me. It began with touch, subtle, ordinary, almost kind. A hand steadying a plate as I reached for it, a palm brushing my shoulder in passing, fingers adjusting a loose thread on my sleeve. Each gesture small enough to disappear inside the fog of family life, too quiet to name, too soft to call wrong. My mother never saw it, or maybe she did and refused to translate what she saw. She was always busy with something, laundry, work calls, recipes she never finished. She had a way of existing just slightly out of sync with the room, as if her mind lived half a second behind every sound. But he was always present, always perfectly in time, and somehow that precision made the world feel smaller. He moved like someone who believed the house was an instrument only he knew how to play. His hands never fumbled. They glided across countertops, doorknobs, the backs of chairs. I began to notice how much space those hands occupied, how every gesture seemed rehearsed, how he filled silence with motion instead of words. When he fixed things around the house, tightened screws, replaced bulbs, folded napkins, it felt performative, like he was proving that his care could be trusted. And yet, there was something beneath it, a rhythm I couldn't unhear once I noticed it, the way his fingers lingered on objects just long enough to make you wonder what they were thinking. There was one afternoon when the light came through the blinds in long, trembling lines, slicing the living room into fragments of gold and dust. I was sitting on the floor, sorting through old books my mother had bought at a garage sale. He walked in and crouched beside me, picking one up at random. His hand brushed mine. Not by accident, by timing. A slow, deliberate pause. My skin burned where he touched me, not because it hurt, but because it meant something. Something neither of us wanted to define. He smiled faintly, as if to make it harmless. "You read a lot," he said, turning a page without looking at it. "Your mother says you remind her of your grandfather." He was quiet, too. I didn't answer. He didn't seem to need one. His fingers tapped once on the open page, just once, gently, and then he left the room. But the touch stayed behind, like a scent that lingers after the source is gone. That night I lay awake and thought about those hands. How they could build and break with equal ease. How they could hold a hammer, a glass of wine, a shoulder, or a lie, and make each seem like the same motion. I remembered once seeing him at the dinner table, turning his wedding ring slowly, over and over, as if it were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. My mother laughed at something on her phone. He didn't. His eyes were on me again, and I felt it, the silent understanding that he wanted something I didn't have a name for. He never touched me in a way the world would call wrong. That was the cruelest part. It was all just close enough to pass as care, far enough to make me doubt my own unease. But his touch carried a language that didn't belong to family. It was coded in pauses, in the air between gestures, in the way he'd rest a hand on the table near mine, but never quite close the distance. I began to feel like the world was conspiring to convince me nothing was happening, when every nerve in my body knew that it was. One evening, my mother asked him to help me fix a light in my room. He brought a stool, stood beneath the flickering bulb, and reached up with both hands. I held the lamp steady. The sleeve of his shirt slipped back as he worked, revealing a scar that ran along his forearm. A thin white line, almost invisible until the light caught it. I asked how he got it. He looked down, his face unreadable. "A long time ago," he said, before I knew better. Then, without warning, he reached out and touched my wrist. His thumb pressed gently against my pulse. "You're shaking," he murmured. I wanted to tell him to let go, but the words froze behind my teeth. He smiled faintly, released me, and turned the light back on. The room flooded with brightness so sudden it made me flinch. "Better," he said, "see? Just needed a little fixing." After he left, I stood there for a long time, staring at my wrist. The skin looked unchanged, but it felt branded somehow, as if something invisible had claimed it. I thought of the scar on his arm, the one that knew better. And I began to understand that some lessons don't heal. They evolve. They move from skin to soul, passing through hands that pretend to help. Over time, his presence began to rearrange my sense of space. I stopped sitting on the couch he favored. I learned to anticipate the direction of his footsteps, to slip through hallways before he could cross them. My mother called me distant, said I was turning strange. I wanted to tell her that the house had rules now, invisible ones written in touch and silence. That every door creaked differently depending on whether he was near. That every breath I took had to measure the distance between his kindness and my fear. But I didn't. I just nodded, smiled, and waited for her to look away. The next morning, when he passed by me on his way to work, his hand brushed my shoulder again. Barely, almost by accident. But this time I didn't move. I let the moment happen, watched him glance back as if testing something. There was no victory in his eyes, only curiosity, maybe even regret. He hesitated at the door, turned slightly and said, "You're growing up fast." Then he left, and the house exhaled. That was the moment I realized he didn't need to hurt me to own a part of me. He just needed me to doubt what I felt, to confuse fear with attention, silence with safety. His hands never had to do anything more. They already knew my name. It started with reflections that didn't behave. The kind of small wrongness that makes your chest tighten before your mind can explain why. I would pass the mirror in the hallway and see myself hesitate, half a breath late, like my reflection had to remember what to do. At first I blamed the old glass, the warping of time and light. But mirrors don't lie. They only show what's already there, waiting to be seen. After that night in my room, when his fingers had traced the edge of my pulse, I began to avoid my reflection. The more I looked, the less I recognized what looked back. My eyes had changed, not their color, but their depth. They seemed heavier, older, carrying something I hadn't consented to hold. I caught myself studying them sometimes, searching for traces of him in me. It's strange how fear can make you mimic the thing that causes it. I started to stand like him, pause like him, measure my words the way he did. The infection wasn't physical, it was mannerism, rhythm, breath. He was rewriting me without touch. The house mirrored that too. Its stillness had grown intimate. Every sound seemed to come from within the walls rather than through them. My mother's laughter, distant, occasional, floated through the air like something rehearsed. She had grown quieter too, though I doubt she noticed. She'd begun humming when she cooked, but it wasn't a tune I recognized. It was circular, like a lullaby that didn't want to end. Sometimes I thought she hummed just to keep herself from hearing what wasn't being said. One evening I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, toothbrush in hand, and saw something impossible. My stepfather passed behind me in the hallway, his reflection crossing mine, but his body never followed. The hallway remained empty. I froze, toothpaste bitter on my tongue. I waited, listening for footsteps, a door, anything. But the house gave nothing back. Only the faint sound of my own heartbeat, echoing like a warning in a place too small to contain it. I told myself it was a trick of light, a half-dream born from exhaustion. Yet, when I looked down, a small drop of condensation had formed on the counter, shaped like a fingerprint. After that, mirrors became messages. Sometimes I'd wake at night to find the one across from my bed fogged over, though there was no heat, no breath to cause it. Once, when I wiped the surface, a faint outline appeared, 2 blurred circles where eyes should be. They were level with mine, watching, waiting. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down I knew the truth. He didn't have to be there to be present. He'd found a way to live in the reflection of every quiet thing. Days folded into each other like pages of a book I no longer wanted to read. My stepfather grew softer, strangely kind. He'd leave notes on the counter, small gestures like, "Bought your favorite tea," or "Fixing the window tomorrow." His smile became gentler, almost human again. But beneath it all, I felt the same gravity pulling at me, the same knowing in his eyes when they met mine. The kindness was worse than silence. It was a disguise that made memory feel like paranoia. One afternoon, I caught him standing in front of the large mirror in the hallway, the same one that had betrayed me. He wasn't grooming or adjusting himself. He was staring, his face unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back like a man standing before a grave. He didn't turn when I entered, didn't even flinch. "It's strange," he said finally, his voice low, "how a mirror can tell you what kind of person you are, not by what it shows, but by what it refuses to show." I didn't answer. The air between us had gone dense, thick with everything unsaid. He met my eyes in the glass instead of turning to face me. "Do you believe in second selves?" he asked softly. "The version of you that stays behind in the reflection when you walk away?" His tone wasn't threatening, just curious, almost philosophical. But there was something in it that made my stomach twist. "I think," I said quietly, "that some reflections shouldn't be trusted." He smiled faintly, still not looking at me directly. "That's what I used to think too." Then he walked away, leaving his own reflection staring after him for a heartbeat too long before it finally followed. That night, I dreamed of mirrors. They lined the walls of the house, floor to ceiling, each one showing a different version of me. One crying, one sleeping, one standing perfectly still with his hands on my shoulders. When I woke, I felt certain I'd heard breathing, but the room was empty except for the dim shape of my reflection in the window. For a moment, I almost thought it was waving. The following morning, the mirror in my room had a crack running through it, a fine white thread that split my face in two. My mother noticed and asked what happened. I told her it must have cracked from the cold. She nodded absently and went back to her coffee. My stepfather said nothing, but when our eyes met, I saw it, the faint curve of understanding in his expression. He knew. He knew what I'd seen, what I'd begun to feel. Maybe he even wanted me to see it. From that day on, I stopped avoiding the mirrors. Instead, I met them head-on. I looked for the small hesitations, the shadows that lagged, the eyes that didn't blink. And one night, standing in that hallway again, I whispered to my reflection, "I see you." The lights flickered once, just once, but it was enough. The mirror didn't blink. And for the first time, I realized neither of us needed to anymore. It rained that night, the kind of rain that seems to erase the edges of the world, where every sound folds into itself until even thunder feels like a memory. The house, always uneasy, became smaller with each passing hour. The windows fogged over, and the air tasted faintly of iron, damp wood, and something else, anticipation. My mother had gone to bed early, her exhaustion the only thing louder than the rain. I stayed awake, sitting in the dim light of the hallway, tracing patterns in the condensation on the wall. That's when I heard him moving downstairs. His footsteps were different that night, slower, uneven, as if he were dragging some invisible weight behind him. I could tell where he was without seeing him. The rhythm of his steps had become so familiar that I could almost map his emotions by sound alone. This time the steps weren't angry or calm. They were lost. I leaned forward, listening. A door opened, the basement door. It creaked like something waking from a long sleep. Then came the low thud of the latch closing, and silence returned. Complete, heavy, absolute. The kind of silence that hums beneath the skin. I waited for him to come back up. He didn't. At first I told myself he was fixing something. He always fixed things. It was his ritual, the quiet way he made the house his. But midnight came and went, and the sound of him never returned. The longer I waited, the more the house began to feel alive again, restless. I could hear it breathing, those faint groans in the walls, the distant hum of the pipes. It felt as though the house was holding its breath for him. Something in me shifted then. The fear that had defined so much of my life in that place began to erode, replaced by a different kind of dread, curiosity. I needed to know what had kept him below. I needed to see what silence had swallowed. I crept down the stairs barefoot, careful not to wake my mother. The floorboards moaned beneath my weight, warning me with each step. The basement door loomed at the end of the hallway, a darker shape in the dark. I reached for the handle. It was cold, damp from the rain that seemed to seep through every wall. I turned it slowly, wincing at the sound of metal grinding against metal. The door opened. The basement smelled of rust and old water. A single bulb swung from the ceiling, its light trembling with each sway, painting the room in pulses of yellow and shadow. I stepped inside, each breath loud enough to sound borrowed. At first, I didn't see him. The room was cluttered with forgotten things, boxes, tools, a bicycle wheel that spun slightly as if moved by the air itself. Then I saw it. The edge of his coat near the far wall, where the light didn't reach. He was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, his head tilted toward the stairs as if he'd been waiting for me. His eyes were open, but unfocused. He didn't move. I stood there, unable to speak, the hum of the bulb filling the space between us. Finally, he exhaled, a sound so quiet I almost mistook it for the house shifting above us. "I didn't mean for it to be this way," he said. His voice was thinner than I'd ever heard it, fraying at the edges. "You look at me like I'm a stranger. Maybe I am." I didn't move closer. The air was too heavy, thick with the smell of rain-soaked dust and something else. Grief, maybe. He looked at the floor, his hands clasped in front of him like a man praying to something that wouldn't answer. "When I was your age," he continued, "I used to see things in people. Little pieces of them they didn't know were showing. I thought it was a gift." His laugh was brittle, almost a cough. Turns out it's a curse. You see too much and it changes you, makes you reach for things you shouldn't. The bulb flickered once, then twice. His shadow shuddered across the wall like something trying to escape its shape. I saw you, he said finally, voice breaking. Not just who you are, but what you carry. The sadness, the silence, the hunger to be understood. I thought if I could just help you, I could fix something in myself. But it doesn't work that way, does it? I wanted to answer, to ask what he meant, but words wouldn't come. The silence between us felt sacred, dangerous. The rain outside grew heavier, pressing against the windows like a restless tide. He looked up at me then, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not of me, but of himself. You don't need to forgive me, he whispered. Just remember what you saw here. Remember that I didn't come out. Then he closed his eyes. I thought he was praying again, but his breathing slowed, steadied, and then stopped. Just like that. No collapse, no struggle, just a quiet surrender. The bulb swung once more, then went still. I stood there until the cold began to reach my bones. When I finally turned to go back upstairs, I didn't look behind me. I didn't have to. The house had gone quiet, not dead, just different, as if it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. When my mother woke the next morning, I told her he hadn't come out. I didn't say from where. I didn't say that the house had watched, that it had known. She nodded slowly, eyes glazed with the kind of disbelief that protects more than it denies. She called someone, then sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. By the time they carried him out, the rain had stopped. The sun rose weakly, uncertain. The house seemed smaller in the light, its walls pale and brittle. For the first time since we'd moved in, it felt empty. And in that emptiness, I realized something terrible and tender all at once. I wasn't afraid anymore. But fear doesn't die. It just changes its name. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in quietly, through the smallest cracks in the day, an untouched cup of coffee, an empty chair, the echo of footsteps that never come again. After he was gone, the house felt like a lung half collapsed, still trying to remember how to breathe without him. My mother moved through it like someone underwater, her movements slow, heavy, deliberate. She didn't cry, not even during the funeral. She simply nodded at the priest's words, her eyes blank as the rain that fell on the casket. I think she was mourning something larger than him. Maybe the illusion that there had ever been peace here at all. For me, grief was quieter. It lived in details. The faint scent of his aftershave that lingered on the banister, the shape of his handwriting on a note pinned to the fridge, the ghost weight of his gaze in the mirror, where I still half expected to see him standing behind me. But beneath that sorrow was something I didn't want to name. Relief. Not joy, not even freedom, but the loosening of a fist I hadn't realized had been gripping my life. I could breathe again, but every breath came with guilt. At night, I would lie awake and listen to the silence that had once frightened me. It was still there, but changed, emptier, less knowing. I began to wonder if the house had loved him in its own strange way, or if it had only mirrored the fear that lived between us. Without him, the walls no longer pulsed. The rooms stopped listening. The house had gone still, as though it, too, was grieving. One evening, I found my mother sitting at the kitchen table staring at a photograph. It was an old one. Him, younger, smiling beside a woman I didn't recognize. The edges were worn, the colors faded. "He used to laugh a lot," she said softly, not looking up. "Before everything. Before us." She turned the photo over. On the back, in his handwriting, was a single word. Remember. She didn't ask me what had happened that night. Maybe she didn't want to know, or maybe she already did. We learned to coexist in the quiet, orbiting around each other like two planets that had survived the same explosion but lost their gravity. She filled her days with motion, new curtains, new paint, new distractions. I filled mine with observation, watching how the light changed through the windows, how the dust moved through sunbeams like a language I was just beginning to understand. Weeks passed before I went down to the basement again. It felt wrong to leave it untouched, as though some part of him still waited for acknowledgement. The air was stale, but calm. The single bulb still hung from the ceiling, unmoving now. I stood where he had sat, tracing the outline of a faint scuff mark on the floor, his final gesture, a trace of presence too small to be a clue, but too heavy to ignore. I whispered his name once and the sound barely left my throat. It didn't echo. The house didn't answer. For the first time, I was grateful. They tell you that the dead can't haunt you if you forgive them. I don't know if that's true. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a door you walk through. It's a corridor you keep finding yourself in, over and over, long after you think you've left. Some nights, I still feel him. Not as a presence, but as a memory moving just beneath the surface of thought. A shift in the air. A flicker in the mirror. Not cruel, not kind. Just there. It took me months to realize what he meant that last night when he said he'd seen me. He hadn't meant my secrets or my pain. He'd seen the part of me that wanted to understand him, the part that couldn't stop searching for meaning in the silence. That's what frightened me most. The possibility that empathy can become a kind of inheritance, passed down even from those who hurt us. I see it now in the way I move through rooms, how I pause before speaking, how I measure my words. The house taught me that language isn't only spoken, it's carried in gestures, in the weight of attention. When I finally left that place, I didn't take much with me. Just a few books, a sweater, and a small mirror I found in the attic, a cracked oval frame with glass clouded by time. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because I needed proof that reflection isn't always a trap. Sometimes it's a way out. Now, years later, I still think about him. Not with anger, not even with fear, but with a strange kind of tenderness. The kind reserved for someone who broke something inside you but left behind the tools to rebuild it. I don't believe he found peace, but I believe he tried. And maybe that's all any of us ever do. Try to touch the world without breaking it, even when our hands don't know how. Sometimes when I catch my own reflection unexpectedly, in a window, a puddle, the curve of a spoon, I almost expect to see him there. Not watching, not haunting, just waiting. And in those moments, I remember what the soul really is. Not a thing that can be owned or seen, but a place where everything we've ever touched still breathes, quietly beneath the surface. The house is gone now, sold to strangers who will never know what it once held. But some nights, when rain crawls down the glass and the world feels small again, I hear it. The soft exhale of memory, the sigh of a home that once knew too much. And I wonder if somewhere, beyond the edge of mirrors and dreams, my stepfather finally learned to come out. Or maybe he never left at all.